The late afternoon light spread across the valley like a quiet hymn, gilding every blade of grass and every weathered stone with a radiance that felt older than time itself. A lone rider approached along the dusty trail, his figure cut against the horizon, weary from miles, yet driven by something far more relentless than distance. Cole Bannister rode without flourish, his chestnut mare carrying him with the patience of one who knew her master carried burdens heavier than saddlebags. His eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of a trail-worn hat, spoke of a man who had looked too often into violence, who had walked away but never truly escaped. The land around him seemed to breathe, whispering promises of silence and soil rich enough to bury regret, to heal scars invisible yet unyielding. Redemption Valley spread before him like a vision, both haunting and hopeful, and he could not shake the sensation that fate itself had drawn him here. The town below waited with a stillness that concealed stories yet untold. White-clappered houses leaned against the sweep of mountains. A church steeple cut the sky with stubborn grace, and smoke curled from chimneys as though inviting him to believe in ordinary lives. But for Cole, ordinary had long since slipped through his grasp. Each hoofbeat carried echoes, shouts from battlefields, the ringing of gunfire, the cries of men whose names he never learned, but whose faces returned in dreams. He longed not merely for land, but for absolution, for the gentle possibility that love might one day rise like dawn after endless night. The ache in him was not only for peace, but for belonging. And though he could not yet know it, the valley would answer his restless heart with more than shelter. It would give him the kind of story that binds two souls across darkness and time. As he entered the town, conversations stilled, eyes turning to measure the stranger. Dust clung to his coat. His beard carried the weight of long roads. Yet something unspoken held him upright, an aura of both sorrow and resilience. The townspeople did not know the wars he had fought, nor the secret that Gettysburg had carved into his very marrow. They saw only a newcomer, but Caroline Bennett would soon look deeper, past his silence, and find the ember still alive within him. And so the path opened, one step at a time, toward danger and desire, toward a love that would defy grief and greed, and toward a redemption neither of them had imagined possible. In the hush of that twilight moment, when sky and earth seemed woven together by threads of gold, the first pieces of his story fell into place. The saloon's piano notes drifted down the street, children's laughter mingled with the lowing of cattle, and all of it felt strangely tender, as though the valley itself wished to soothe a man scarred by years of wandering. Healing began not in grand gestures, but in the simple rhythm of a place that demanded nothing more than presence. Yet even here, shadows lingered, powerful men, unsaid truths and trials that would test every fragile spark of hope he carried. Cole did not know it then, but love was already waiting for him, clothed in auburn hair and steadfast eyes, ready to remind him that even the most fractured soul could be pieced back together by grace. If this glimpse into a journey of love, healing, and second chances touches something inside you, let your heart speak. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and join this unfolding story. A simple gesture of support, liking, subscribing, or following along, helps keep these stories alive so they can continue to offer warmth when days feel cold and comfort when silence feels heavy. Together, we can walk deeper into Redemption Valley, where past sorrows meet present courage, and where the promise of love turns into the most enduring home. And so the trail stretches onward, carrying us to the next chapter, where fate begins to reveal its hand. Night descended over the valley with a silence that felt almost holy, and yet inside Cole Bannister's chest the quiet carried a storm. The campfire crackled low, its flames painting shifting light across his weathered face, and in that glow his eyes betrayed the weight of years he had never dared to speak aloud. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it returned him to places he longed to forget. The thunder of cannon fire, the acrid veil of smoke, the metallic sting of blood in the air, all came rushing back, as if no years had passed at all. Gettysburg was never truly gone. It lived in fragments that woke him in the dark. The boyish officer who had raised his pistol, the single desperate moment when survival demanded one life over another, the locket that slipped from the young man's hand like a final prayer. That night Cole held his rifle across his knees, not because danger threatened, but because memory had claws sharper than any enemy's blade. The Wyoming sky stretched vast above him, thick with stars that pulsed like living embers, each one a reminder that light can endure even after violent endings. He stared upward until his eyes blurred, whispering a silent plea he could not name. His soul was tired. Tired of blood, of drifting, of bearing guilt that no court could judge, yet every night condemned. But something in the land beneath him stirred hope, however fragile. Redemption Valley was not only a name printed in a newspaper advertisement. It was an invocation, a promise that maybe even a man like him could lay down his burdens and find a place where the heart might heal. He wanted to believe that the soil itself carried mercy, that streams running silver in the moonlight could wash away old scars. When dawn came, it revealed more than landscape. It revealed a choice. The valley opened before him, framed by mountains capped with lingering snow, meadows where grass rippled like water, and a creek that sang its own hymn of renewal. Cole dismounted, removed his hat, and for the first time in years let something softer than war touch him. Hope, tentative yet undeniable. He did not yet know that his presence here would ignite dormant fires, that enemies from the past would step forward wearing new faces, and that love, unexpected and unwavering, would rise in the form of a woman whose voice carried both strength and solace. The town awaited him with both suspicion and possibility. Each face he passed would carry its own judgment, each whispered word a measure of whether he could be accepted. Yet fate had already begun weaving threads he could not untangle. Caroline Bennett, standing in the doorway of a modest cottage near the church, would soon step into his life with eyes that saw not only the stranger before her, but the man within, burdened and yet unbroken. Her presence would alter every course he thought fixed, her compassion a balm he did not know he needed. Love would not arrive with thunder or fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of recognition, a meeting of souls long delayed yet destined. Beneath the surface of this valley, old rivalries and unspoken truths coiled like serpents, ready to strike. William Harrington's reach stretched across land, law, and livelihoods, and his gaze would soon fall on Cole with a venom sharpened by grief. But on this morning, with sun washing the hills in gold and air fragrant with pine, Cole allowed himself the fragile grace of beginning again. The pain of Gettysburg still pressed into him, but alongside it now stirred the faintest promise that scars might be more than reminders of loss. They might become the very places where light entered. If this journey stirs something in you, if the promise of redemption and the tender unfolding of love brings warmth to your heart, let your voice be part of it. Like this story, if it touches you, share your thoughts in a comment and subscribe so you can walk further into these chapters of hope and healing. Each gesture is not only support, but a joining of souls in a tale that longs to remind us all that even in the aftermath of pain, love waits with gentle hands. And so the story moves forward, carrying Cole from the quiet of the valley's edge into the current of fate, where Caroline's eyes, Harrington's shadow, and the pull of destiny await. The door of the modest cottage opened, and there she stood, framed by the soft light spilling from within, her auburn hair catching fire against the pale morning sun. For an instant, Cole Bannister forgot the weariness in his bones and the scars buried deep in memory. Caroline Bennett's gaze met his with an intensity that unsettled him, not because it was harsh, but because it was searching, as though she had the power to read truths he had long kept hidden. Her green eyes carried both gentleness and unyielding resolve, the kind born of faith tested by loss. Cole had met many faces on lonely roads, but this one struck like an arrow, silent yet impossible to ignore. The valley had promised redemption, but in that moment it offered something more dangerous: connection. Caroline's voice, when it came, was clear and steady, like the ringing of a church bell across an empty prairie. She asked his name, and he gave it without hesitation, though the sound felt foreign on his own tongue, as if speaking it here gave it weight again. Her presence reminded him of things he thought he had abandoned long ago: trust, gentleness, the longing for a place at another's side. She was no stranger to hardship. That much he could tell in the set of her shoulders, in the shadow that passed briefly across her expression when she mentioned her late father, the pastor whose absence still echoed through the town. Yet even in grief she stood upright, unbent, her spirit a quiet flame. Cole felt the warmth of it even before he stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and books, a home crafted not with wealth but with care. Every detail reflected Caroline's hand, the neatness, the order, the quiet dignity. Mrs. Stevens, frail but sharp-eyed, soon joined them, her presence reminding Cole that this meeting was no chance encounter. Questions were asked with blunt honesty: why he sought the Stevens homestead, why Redemption Valley, why now? His answer, though simple, came from the core of him. The word redemption itself had drawn him here, and for once he did not hide behind silence. Something in his reply softened the old woman, though her warning was clear. This land came with conditions, not just in paper and coin, but in the weight of loyalty. And Caroline, standing nearby, watched him with a gaze that seemed to measure his very soul. When the deed was signed, when the last coin left his calloused hands, Cole expected only relief. Instead, he felt a strange stillness, as though the ground itself had claimed him. Caroline handed him the paper with fingers that trembled ever so slightly, and in that brush of skin against skin, time seemed to pause. There was nothing spoken, yet something unspoken bloomed, an understanding, fragile but undeniable. He realized then that this woman was not merely a guardian of her aunt or her father's church. She was a guardian of principles, of the unseen truths that outlasted war and power. and against his will, Cole found himself drawn toward that light. Outside, the valley stretched wide and waiting, but his mind lingered on the flicker of her smile as she reminded him of Sunday service. It was not flirtation, but something more profound, an invitation into belonging, into the rhythm of lives built on faith and resilience. Cole had been drifting for decades, but one meeting with Caroline Bennett had unsettled the course of his wandering heart. He rode away with the deed tucked inside his coat, but what weighed heavier was the memory of her eyes, the way they seemed to see both the burden he carried and the man he still might become. Love often begins not with declarations, but with recognition. The silent shock of finding in another what you thought the world had denied you. For Cole, that recognition had struck, and it carried the sweetness of hope wrapped in the ache of fear. He did not yet know the trials that would follow, the shadow of William Harrington, the ghosts of Gettysburg rising again, the violence waiting just beyond the horizon. For now, there was only the echo of her voice, the promise of Sunday, and the sense that the valley had offered not just land, but a chance to build something that might outlast sorrow. If this moment stirs your heart, if you feel the tenderness of two souls circling each other in the quiet beginnings of love, let yourself be part of their journey. A simple like, a thoughtful comment, or a gentle subscription becomes more than support. It becomes a thread woven into this story of healing and second chances. Walk with Cole and Caroline as their paths entwine through danger and desire, through shadows and light, into the next chapter where fate will test the fragile bond now awakening. And so, with twilight deepening over the valley, Cole rode toward his new land, unaware that his true destiny had already begun in the unwavering eyes of Caroline Bennett. The morning broke with a deceptive calm, sunlight spilling over Redemption Valley as though the world knew no malice, no secret cruelty. Yet beneath the golden light, shadows already gathered. Cole Bannister stood on the threshold of his new land, surveying the half-finished cabin and the creek bending like a silver thread across the meadow. It should have been a moment of triumph, a healing step toward permanence after years of wandering. Instead, the silence pressed heavy, as if the soil itself held its breath, waiting for the storm to reveal itself. The storm came not from the sky, but from the man whose name already echoed in whispers through every street and farmhouse, William Harrington. Cole had not yet seen him, but the valley bore the mark of his hand. Miners bent beneath cruel hours, ranch hands who spoke little, shopkeepers who measured every word, and a sheriff whose politeness carried the stiffness of fear. Jacob Morgan, with the candor of a man too decent to hide truth, had warned him. Harrington owned the mine, the cattle, the mortgages, and perhaps the law itself. Cole had crossed men of power before, but something in the way Jacob spoke, measured, almost reverent, told him this enemy would not be like the rest. Cole had known danger in forms both honest and vile, but nothing in his past had prepared him for the trap that awaited him here, the invisible net of wealth and vengeance that Harrington wove. Yet, even as suspicion coiled around him, another force rose to steady his steps. Caroline Bennett had warned him with quiet fire in her voice. Harrington doesn't offer kindness, only bargains. In her words, Cole felt not only caution, but also loyalty, as though she had taken upon herself the risk of guiding a stranger. Every glance between them carried weight, unspoken but undeniable, a pull neither dared to name, but both already felt in their bones. When the body of Luis Rodriguez swung from a tree on Cole's land, the valley's mask of peace split open. The crude sign, Harrington Justice for Thieves, was less about punishment and more about power, a message meant for Cole himself. Standing beneath the oak, staring at the lifeless form of a man condemned without trial, Cole's jaw tightened. He had buried too many on battlefields to accept another senseless death. He cut the rope, lowering Rodriguez with reverence, and in Caroline's eyes he saw gratitude tempered by fear. She knew, as he did, that this act placed him squarely in Harrington's path. The war Cole thought he had left behind had only changed its name and battlefield. And yet, within the tension, something tender unfolded. Caroline's presence at his side in that moment was not duty, but choice. She could have looked away, let silence protect her, but instead she bore witness. In that simple act, she became more than a voice of warning. She became an ally of his heart. He had sought only land, a place to rest, but now the valley gave him something far more dangerous, something that breathed hope into wounds that had never healed. Caroline's steady voice, her defiance against Harrington's unspoken threats, became a salve, and Cole realized that peace was not merely the absence of war, but the presence of someone willing to stand beside you in its shadow. Harrington's invitation to dine, delivered like a command, confirmed what Cole already knew. The lines were drawn. Yet behind the looming conflict, a gentler truth emerged. Each time Caroline's eyes lingered on him, each time her voice softened as she spoke of her father's faith, Cole felt the stirrings of something he had long believed lost. Love, tentative and fragile, blossomed even as danger pressed closer. It was this paradox, the mingling of threat and tenderness, that made the valley unbearable to leave and impossible to ignore. The cabin walls rose slowly under his hands, timber fitted with care, every board nailed not just for shelter, but as a vow to himself that he would not run this time. With every strike of the hammer, echoes of war quieted, replaced by the sound of creation, of a life taking shape. And always, in the back of his thoughts, was Caroline, her courage, her grief, her quiet fire. She was the thread that tied him to this land more firmly than any deed or coin could. Love and conflict walked side by side in Redemption Valley. The soil promised healing, but only if one dared to fight for it. Cole knew that his presence here would cost him blood, perhaps even his life, but he also knew that the pull of Caroline's spirit, the possibility of a love that could restore more than land, made the risk not only bearable, but necessary. If this moment draws you deeper into the tale, if the blend of danger and devotion, of scars and healing, stirs something within you, then let your heart answer. A like, a comment, a quiet subscription is more than an act. It is a gesture of solidarity with these souls searching for light in a valley shadowed by power. Walk beside them, and together we will journey further, toward the chapter where love begins to burn brighter than fear, and where Cole and Caroline's bond is tested in fire but strengthened in grace. The story moves forward now, into the very heart of the storm. The knock at his cabin door came with the hush of dusk, soft yet insistent, the kind of sound that unsettled the air and promised revelation. Cole Bannister set aside his hammer, brushing sawdust from his hands, and reached instinctively for the revolver that never strayed far. When he opened the door, Caroline Bennett stood framed by the fading light, her auburn hair loosened by the wind, her expression a mixture of urgency and quiet defiance. In that instant, he knew his days of solitude were over. She had crossed more than distance to stand here. She had crossed into his life, into the marrow of his fate. Her words came in a rush, hushed and steady. Harrington had sent his men, and whispers of vengeance carried through town like wildfire. She should not have come. Propriety would condemn her, tongues would wag. Yet here she was, risking her name to shield his life. That choice alone spoke louder than any sermon, more healing than any prayer he had heard in years. Cole felt the truth press into him. This woman was not merely a fleeting presence. She was the compass he had lost, the answer he had stopped seeking. Together they stepped out into the night, the air sharp with the scent of pine and the echo of hooves somewhere in the distance. She told him of threats veiled as bargains, of Harrington's hand stretching even into the church, twisting faith into leverage. Her voice wavered only when she spoke of her father's death, the accident that was no accident at all. Cole listened with the patience of a man who had carried grief too long to dismiss another's pain. And in the silence, after her confession, something shifted between them. A bond forged not by words of love, but by the raw courage of trust. When the riders came, their silhouettes against the moonlight, Cole knew the choice was already made. He would not run, not from Harrington, not from the ghosts of Gettysburg, not from the future now standing beside him in the form of Caroline Bennett. Gunfire cracked the night. Flames threatened to devour the fragile walls of his half-built home, and yet within that chaos there bloomed an intimacy stronger than fear. She stood with him, derringer in hand, her resolve matching his own. For every shadow cast by vengeance there was a flame of loyalty, of love unspoken but undeniable. Later, when the fire's smoke drifted skyward like a dark prayer, Cole and Caroline escaped through the hidden tunnel Hiram Stevens had once prepared. Side by side in the cramped earth passage, they crawled toward the creek, their breaths mingling, their hands brushing in the narrow dark. It was there, in that suffocating space, that Cole understood. Survival meant nothing without someone to survive for. And Caroline, in her steadfast bravery, had become the heart that pulled him forward. The valley no longer felt like soil to till or land to claim. It felt like destiny's stage, where love and danger danced inseparably. He had come seeking peace, but what he found was far greater and far more perilous, a chance to build not only a life, but a life entwined with hers. The war between Harrington's iron grip and Cole's wounded honor had only begun, but beneath it all pulsed the tender truth that healing was possible, not in solitude, but in the warmth of shared faith and shared hearts. If this chapter touches something within you, if the mixture of danger and devotion stirs hope in your own weary places, let your presence be felt. Like this story, leave a comment, subscribe to follow each step of this unfolding journey. Every gesture helps keep alive a tale woven with love, redemption, and the healing reminder that even in the darkest night, two souls can find each other and light a fire that refuses to be extinguished. Ahead lies betrayal, revelation, and the deepest test of their bond. But here, in the embers of survival, Cole and Caroline's love has begun to take root, fragile and fierce, ready to bloom. The dinner invitation arrived like a velvet-clad threat, delivered with William Harrington's customary precision. And Cole Bannister knew before he ever set foot in that grand White House that the evening would not be about food. Still, he went, dressed in the cleanest shirt he owned, hair slicked back with water, the rough edges of a drifter's life smoothed as best they could be. The Harrington estate stood above the valley like a monument to control, its lamps blazing gold against the gathering dusk, its doors yawning wide as if to swallow him whole. Inside, wealth glittered in polished mahogany, crystal chandeliers, oil portraits of ancestors who seemed to gaze down with cold judgment. Cole carried himself with the same composure he had once worn on battlefields, calm on the surface, steel in his core. Harrington poured bourbon with the ease of a host, yet every movement dripped with calculation. Their words were polite, even cordial at first, but beneath them ran the pulse of something darker. When the older man offered $2,000 for Cole's newly purchased land, it was not an offer at all, but a command cloaked in civility. Cole refused with the same quiet firmness that had guided him through years of war and law-keeping. That moment stretched like a drawn bow, Harrington's smile never faltering, but his eyes hardening into shards of winter. The war was not over. It had merely shifted battlefields, and tonight the table was their front line. But what chilled Cole most was not Harrington's money, nor his veiled threats of accidents and frontier justice. It was the revelation, slipped casually into conversation like a blade into soft flesh. Robert Harrington, William's only son, had fallen at Gettysburg, a lieutenant, barely 20. Cole's heart clenched as the memory returned. Smoke, chaos, a boyish face with fierce eyes, a pistol raised, the split-second choice that had haunted his dreams ever since. He had carried that guilt for 22 years, the face of the young man who had dropped a locket as he fell, the face that never left him. And now, across a table polished to perfection, Cole realized the father of that boy sat before him, wealthy, vengeful, and bent on retribution. When Cole left the estate, the night air felt heavier, as though even the stars recoiled from the truth. He rode hard back toward his cabin, but shadows rode with him. At the split rock, Caroline Bennett appeared from the darkness, her grey mare lathered from haste, her face pale but determined. She had come to warn him, risking reputation and safety alike, whispering truths that cut sharper than knives. Harrington did not merely covet land or power, he hunted vengeance. Caroline's voice trembled only when she revealed what she had pieced together. Robert Harrington was the same Confederate officer Cole had killed on that blood-soaked field. The circle of fate had closed with cruel precision. For a moment, Cole could not breathe. The coincidence was too exact, too merciless. Every mile he had ridden west, every year he had spent drifting, had led him here, to this valley, to the father of the one man whose death he could never forget. Was it punishment from heaven, or Providence offering him a chance to face what he had long fled? His eyes met Caroline's in the moonlight, and in her gaze he found not judgment, but a fierce, unwavering compassion. She had seen his ghosts, touched his scars with her words, and still she stood beside him. In that moment, the healing he had sought in silence began to stir, not because the past had vanished, but because he no longer bore it alone. The night deepened, filled with whispers of pursuit and the promise of fire. Harrington's men were already moving, Jackson and his riders circling like wolves. Cole knew the hours ahead would test every fragment of strength left in him. Yet, as he stood beside Caroline, her hand briefly brushing his, he felt a warmth he had not known in decades. Love, fragile yet resolute, burned against the cold weight of guilt. This valley would not give him peace without a fight, but perhaps peace had never meant the absence of struggle. Perhaps it meant finding someone willing to face the struggle with you. If this chapter of their journey stirs something within you, if the collision of past sins and present devotion speaks to your heart, let your presence be felt. Like this story, if it moves you, leave a comment to share your thoughts and subscribe so that you can walk with Cole and Caroline as their path winds deeper into fire and forgiveness. Each gesture is more than support. It is a joining of hearts in a tale that reminds us all, even in the fiercest storm, healing is possible and love can rise like dawn after the darkest night. The fire waits, the battle nears, but so too does the blossoming of a love that will defy both grief and vengeance. The first gunshot split the night like a cruel reminder that peace was a fragile dream. Cole Bannister crouched behind the woodpile, breath steady despite the pounding of his heart, eyes fixed on the figures advancing toward his cabin with torches and rifles. Shadows moved against the firelight, Jackson and his men, grim as spectres, their voices sharp with vengeance. They had not come to bargain, they had come to end him. From within the cabin, faint light flickered against the shutters, and he thought of Caroline Bennett inside, her courage holding her steady even as danger closed in. She should have fled, yet she remained, because leaving him to face death alone was a choice her soul could not make. That loyalty, fierce and quiet, burned hotter in him than the flames climbing his porch. When the torch arced through the air and landed on dry timber, Cole raised his rifle and answered fire with fire. The night erupted with chaos, shouts, gunpowder, sparks. His bullet caught Jackson in the shoulder, spinning the foreman back, but not stopping the charge. The cabin groaned as flames licked upward, threatening to consume the fragile hope he had begun to build. Inside, Caroline did not cower. She stepped into the doorway with her derringer hidden, her voice cutting through the smoke like a bell. She spoke of law, of justice, of Judge Foster riding with truth at his side, though they both knew she was bluffing. Yet her words carried the force of conviction, and even hardened gunmen faltered under her gaze. In that moment, she was more than preacher's daughter, more than a woman tied by loss. She was the valley's quiet defiance made flesh. They escaped through the hidden tunnel carved years before by Hiram Stevens, crawling through the earth with smoke and gunfire roaring above. In the suffocating dark, their hands brushed, fingers tangling as if instinct knew what words had not yet claimed. They were bound, no longer strangers, but two souls carrying each other through fire. When they emerged by the creek, the cool rush of water and the silvered willows felt like a baptism, washing ash from skin, easing the burn of terror, and planting something deeper, healing not of body, but of spirit. Cole looked at Caroline, dirt streaking her dress, eyes bright with resolve, and he felt a tenderness more powerful than any rifle in his hands. The night was not merciful. Pursuit followed. Voices carried on the wind, promises of blood for Harrington's justice. They fled toward the Peterson ranch, the moon guiding their path, the cold air sharp but alive with breathless urgency. Cole's mind raced not with fear of death, but with the thought that he could not bear losing her. Caroline rode beside him, refusing to falter, her presence an anchor against the chaos. She spoke of her father, of faith, of the belief that even in darkness, truth must rise. Her words steadied him, reminding him that this fight was not only for survival, but for the soul of the valley, for the forgotten graves and silenced voices. At the Peterson Line cabin, sanctuary felt tenuous. Every creak of wood warned of danger near. Every gust of wind could have been riders in pursuit. Yet within those walls, something fragile and profound unfolded. Cole kept watch at the window, rifle across his knees, while Caroline sat nearby with the journal of her father pressed to her chest. Their conversation flowed in whispers, stories of past wounds and fleeting hopes, until silence bound them tighter than words. She looked at him, not with pity, but with recognition. The kind of gaze that heals by seeing a man as he is, and still choosing to stay. Cole realized he was no longer a drifter, defined by ghosts. With her, he was becoming something else. A man capable of love, of roots, of redemption. The night dragged, heavy with waiting, until at last new riders appeared, Jacob Morgan and Sarah Washington, bringing news that Harrington's wrath spread like wildfire. Betrayal and truth twisted together, and soon Cole discovered that the battle was not only against Harrington, but against forces closer, darker, more treacherous than he had guessed. Yet, in that crucible, standing shoulder to shoulder with Caroline, he felt a conviction deeper than survival. Their bond, tested by flames and gunfire, was no accident. It was providence. And so, as dawn threatened the horizon, Cole made a vow not with words, but with his unshakable stance. He would not run, not this time. Redemption Valley had given him land, but Caroline had given him reason. Together they would fight, and together they would heal, no matter the cost. If this moment grips your heart, if the fire, the devotion, and the unyielding hope awaken something inside you, let yourself lean into it. Like this story to keep its flame alive, comment your thoughts to join the circle of voices walking this journey, and subscribe so you will not miss the chapters where love grows even amid danger. Every gesture keeps the light burning, reminding us that even when nights are darkest, healing rises with the dawn. Ahead waits betrayal revealed, justice demanded, and a love that will only deepen as storm and silence give way to truth. The morning after the fire dawned with an eerie stillness, the kind that made every sound echo sharper, every breath feel heavier. Cole Bannister stood on the ridge above the valley, the ruins of his cabin still smouldering behind him, grey tendrils of smoke rising into a sky too blue for such sorrow. His hands bore the grime of ash and gunpowder, yet his gaze carried a steadiness that had been absent for years. He had faced death before, on fields littered with broken men, but last night had been different. Last night he had not fought only for survival. He had fought for Caroline Bennett, for her life, for her courage, for the possibility of a future that no fire could destroy. And in that knowledge, something inside him healed, like a bone long broken finally set right. Caroline emerged from the tree line, her auburn hair damp with morning mist, her dress torn, but her stride unyielding. She carried her father's journal pressed against her chest, as though the worn leather book were both shield and promise. When she reached Cole, she paused, studying him with eyes that seemed to see the war within him as clearly as the battlefield scars without. Then, without a word, she reached for his hand. The simple touch quieted the storm inside him more than any sermon or oath ever could. Cole looked at her and realized that Redemption Valley was no longer just a place on a map. It was wherever she stood. They descended into town together, and the streets seemed transformed. Whispers still followed Cole, suspicion shadowed him, but beside Caroline's unwavering presence, the stares softened. Jacob Morgan greeted them with the relief of a man who had prayed for dawn, and even Sarah Washington's betrayal, though it cut deep, had cleared the path for truth to surface. Harrington's power had cracked like glass, shattered by his own obsessions, and the people who once bowed in fear began to lift their heads. Redemption was not a single act, but a long, slow rising, like the valley itself greeting the morning sun after a bitter night. In the church that Sunday, Caroline's voice carried through the rafters, not trembling, but strong, steady, healing. She spoke of David facing Goliath, of courage rooted not in strength, but in conviction, of choosing to stand even when the world urged surrender. Her gaze lingered on Cole, and in that glance he felt both exposed and embraced, as if her words were stitched directly into his soul. He sat among the pews with calloused hands folded, not in prayer, but in silent gratitude, for her, for the chance to begin again, for the possibility that love could grow from soil once drenched in blood. Weeks turned into months, and the seasons shifted. Winter came, hard and merciless, but Cole and Caroline endured, working side by side to rebuild what fire had taken. Each plank nailed into the new cabin, each stone laid into the hearth, became a quiet vow. At night, when the wind howled against the walls, Caroline read aloud from her father's journal, her voice weaving warmth into the cold. Sometimes Cole shared his memories too, the locket lost at Gettysburg, the faces that haunted him, the long years of drifting. She never recoiled, never judged. Instead, she listened, her hand resting over his, as if to remind him that even the deepest wounds could be touched with tenderness. And in that touch, healing seeped through him, slow but sure, like spring thaw breaking frozen ground. By the time spring arrived, Redemption Valley bloomed not only with wildflowers, but with new beginnings. The people elected Jacob Morgan mayor, reforms took root, and the shadow of Harrington's reign faded into memory. Cole stood once more on the porch of his home, rebuilt, enlarged, not merely a shelter, but a symbol of permanence. Caroline stood beside him, her hair glowing in the sunlight, her laughter carrying across the fields like music. He realized then that the war was truly over, not because he had defeated his enemies, but because he had chosen to live, to love, to stay. One evening, as twilight softened the sky, he turned to Caroline and spoke words he had never thought he would dare. He asked her to walk with him, not just through the valley, but through all the days to come. Her eyes filled with light, and her smile held the certainty of a woman who had already made that choice in her heart. Their kiss that night was not the fevered spark of desperation, but the steady flame of two souls who had found home in each other. And so, the story of Cole Bannister and Caroline Bennett became more than survival, more than defiance against a tyrant's grasp. It became a hymn of healing, of love discovered not in innocence but in resilience, of redemption not as a word but as a life lived. The valley that once threatened to consume them now cradled them in its wide embrace, whispering through its winds that even the most broken past could be redeemed by grace. If this journey has touched something in your heart, if you feel the warmth of healing and the quiet strength of love rising through these words, I invite you to share that feeling. Like this story to let its flame burn brighter. Leave a comment with your thoughts so we can walk this path together. And subscribe to stay close as more chapters of love, resilience, and redemption unfold. Every gesture joins us in reminding the world that even in the darkest valleys, light can bloom and love can lead us home.